My name is Charles Harrell with the Veterans History Project. I'm here in Spotsylvania County, Virginia. It is March 3rd, 2008. I'm interviewing Mr. Edward Cole. For the record, Mr. Cole, would you state your full name?
Edward Samuel Cole.
And what is your current address?
9912 Courthouse Road, Spotsylvania, Virginia.
Is that 22553?
Yes.
Where were you born, Mr. Cole?
Baltimore, Maryland.
And when were you born?
August 15th, 1930. Long time ago.
When you served in the military, what branch of service were you in?
Air Force.
Were you commissioned, enlisted, or drafted?
Enlisted.
Why did you enlist?
To get an education. I had no monetary way of going to college, and I wanted to go to college, so I enlisted to get the GI Bill.
When did you enlist?
July 7th, 1948.
And when did they discharge you?
July 10th, I believe.
8th? July
1952, July 8th, 1952.
What was your highest rank?
Airman first.
And during your activities overseas, what was your primary squadron you were attached to?
The 85th Supply Group.
What war or operation or conflict did you serve in? Would that be the Cold War?
Yes.
And where was your primary area of service?
I spent probably, I was in Europe for 3 years, and I spent probably 2.5 of that at Hanau Signal Depot, which was in Hanau, Germany. It was about 80 miles from Frankfurt, Germany.
You're Frankfurt then? Well,
Yeah.
okay. And what did you do while you were there?
The Air Force used to be the Army Air Force. They separated into a separate branch of service in 1947, but they had no logistics. They had nothing. So I was sent with 4 other gentlemen to Hanau, which was an Army base, and we were Air Force. We were the only Air Force on that base. It was about 2,000 Army people. It was a supply depot, and what we were the middleman. The Air Force would requisition parts and stuff. They would send the requisition to us, and then we would put it into Army language, on Army forms, and the Army would send it to them. Otherwise, they wouldn't have got anything because the Army didn't recognize Air Force forms. So we were kind of in the middle. And I was there for almost 2.5 years doing just that. Just 5 of us on the Army base.
Later on, you participated in the Berlin Airlift.
I participated before that.
Before that time?
Yeah.
What was your primary job in the Berlin Airlift?
I was what they call a load master. Basically, I would take and list all the food, milk, material, whatever it was that we loaded on the airplane. And then I would get somebody I would sign for it when it was loaded. And then when it was offloaded, I would get somebody to sign that they got it. So we had somebody at both ends to verify that it was loaded and somebody at the other end that it was offloaded. And that's all I did.
Did you have to account for the weight of the material?
I had nothing to do with any of that. Mostly German personnel, German civilians, ex-German military types. They loaded the airplane I was in Rhine, Maine Air Base. They loaded it, and when we got to Tempelhof in Berlin, they offloaded it. I never touched a thing. All I had to do was make sure it was strapped down and stayed strapped down while we were flying.
So you were in the airplane when it was flown?
Yes. Yeah, for about, I flew maybe a dozen missions up there. But that's all I did. I just sort of went along for the ride, which was nice.
I'd like to drop back and talk about who you were before you went in the military. You mentioned you were born in Baltimore, Maryland. Was your family from Baltimore?
My father came from Russia and my mother came from Latvia. My father came over in 1904. My mother came over, I think, a year later. I'm not 100% sure. They were married in 1908 and they became citizens in 1917.
What were their names?
My father was William Chaim Cole, Chaim is his middle name. And my mother was Frances Robinson. They were first cousins and they married. His brother, he had 6 brothers, and she had, I don't know, 3 or 4 sisters. One of her sisters married one of his brothers. So we had 2 people marrying first cousins. And I did a genealogy on my family once. The chart was 3 feet long, wide, because they both came from the mother and the father of each side were brother and sister, and the genealogy chart got crazy. It got real long, and my friends always say that's what's the matter with me. I came from first cousins.
When you were growing up, did you know about your parents being first cousins?
Yeah, I guess I was about 10 when I found that out. I never knew my grandfather. He also came over from Russia. And my grandmother, I was about maybe 3 or 4 years old when she passed away, so I never really knew her either. My father was 46 years old when I was born. My mother was 43. I have a brother, had a brother, who was 10 years older than I was. And I had, I guess, maybe a different kind of childhood because my father came from the old country. He wasn't like fathers of today, you know. He didn't play ball with me. He didn't take me anywhere. He just worked. That's all he ever did.
What was his job?
He was a photographer, portrait photographer. He was so good, he used to take pictures of congressmen. He would drive an old car over to Washington, D.C. from Baltimore and literally go to Congress and take pictures of senators, reps, and whatever. And as a matter of fact, he took a picture of McKeldin, who was vice president at some point in time. He didn't take it when he was vice president, he took it when he was governor of Maryland. And so we never had a lot. Growing up through the Depression, I had an uncle, one of my uncles was a bootlegger. And he kept the rest of the family, his brothers, his sisters, in food. He made all the money and he'd pass it out to all the others.
Where was this, in Baltimore?
In Baltimore. I don't know where my uncle was. I mean, where he was doing his bootlegging. But I know we had one of these big 4-poster bathtubs, and my father used to make beer and wine in it. I remember that because I stirred it a few times when I was, I don't know, 8 or 9 years old. But if it weren't for my uncle, we'd have been on the bread line just like everybody else, I guess. And,
so your dad's business really took a hit during the Great Depression?
Everybody's. During the Depression, everybody's. I mean, my neighbors, many of them lost their jobs. They struggled for food. Now, I was only, 8 or 9 years old. But I remember that. There was a guy up the street who owned a grocery store, and he used to give handouts to a lot of the neighbors because he didn't have food, and he would help them. He was making money, not a lot, but he was making enough money to survive and help the other people. And I remember those things. People were, I don't know, to me anyway, a lot more generous and caring of their neighbors than they always seem to be today.
Were you living in a neighborhood of any sort?
Yeah, well, we lived at the end of the streetcar line. We didn't have buses and stuff. We had streetcars, and we lived at the very end. And I lived near Pimlico Racetrack. Everybody has heard of the Preakness, and that's where it's run, at Pimlico. I used to park cars, sell papers, all sorts of things, because we were only about 3 blocks away from that. We were 3 houses, and the next house was a good block away from us. So we were 3 houses in 1 block. And my father bought that house in 1927 for $3,100. And we lived in that house. Well, he lived there till he died in '69. So I lived there all my life.
Did you all have power and running water?
Yep. We had all that. As a matter of fact, when I got in the military, one of the most amusing things to me, anyway, when they assigned us our barracks, I remember 2 guys in there from Tennessee that were in the shower looking up at the wall and saying, "Gee, water comes out of the walls," because they had never seen running water. No, we always, even my wife, she didn't have running water either. She used to bathe in a big tub in front of the wood stove in Cal. She came from California. But I always had running water, indoor plumbing, no outhouses, nothing like that. So,
The streetcar, did you ride that streetcar into Baltimore often?
every day when I went to high school,
So you had to take a streetcar to high school?
yes. I walked to junior high, took me about an hour to go to junior high, but I walked every day. I walked elementary, which was only maybe 4 blocks away. In the beginning, my mother walked with me until I was 9, I guess, 9 or so. And I went to an all-boys school, high school, right in the middle of downtown Baltimore.
What was the name of it?
Baltimore Polytechnic Institute.
It was a high school?
Yes. It was, as far as I'm concerned, the best high school in the city. It was really a great high school.
Let's drop back again and think about the 1930s. I realize you're born in 1930, and by the time the war comes along, you're 11 years old. But can you remember anything about your home, like radio, that you listened to before the war?
My mother used to listen to the radio we had, and she would listen to all the, I guess you call them serials, like Stella Dallas and Mr. Keene, Tracer of Lost Persons, and I used to listen to The Inner Sanctum with the squeaky door and this kind of stuff. There was no television to sit and watch, so in my case, I either did homework or I listened to the radio. Although I did a lot of sports because we had a big ball field where semi-pro people used to play ball. So we had a big baseball diamond, and we would go play football. I belonged to Little League football, Little League baseball, And we did all those things. And I never had to go anywhere. It's like my grandchildren, they got to be transported everywhere to go. We had it all right in front of us. And I really enjoyed my growing up. It was wonderful. I thought my childhood was something I can look back on. I had a lot of fun. We used to swim in a quarry, and we got in a little trouble once in a while doing things, but nothing bad. I remember one time, Halloween, we used to like to do trick or treat Halloween.
In the 30s.
In the 30s, in the 40s, early 40s. I remember when I was 16. This was 1946 now. I'm still in high school, and I was with a bunch of friends, 4 of them, and we found a car. We used to move cars down the street, just push them a little ways so when the guy came out of his house, he couldn't find his car. It wasn't in front of his house like it was supposed to be. And in my neighborhood, most people parked on the street. There were no garages. And we found this one car that had the keys in it. And I was the only one who could drive. So we went for a little ride. It was a convertible. Halloween was October 30th, I think. It was cold. We put the top down. We were having a ball riding around. The next day, we parked it. We didn't do any mischief to it. We parked it, not by his house, but by another kid's house that we didn't like. And we happened to go there the next day, and there were police all over this car. And this kid that we didn't like, he was telling us how a murder was committed in that car, which, of course, we knew better. It wasn't done, but he gave us a real song and dance about that car. Well, we did things like that. We had a little mischief in us, but we enjoyed it. We didn't do anything really bad.
You mentioned we. Do you have brothers and sisters?
I had one brother that was 10 years old, older than me, and I never really did much with him. We had a swing on the front porch, one of these old-time swings that had chains and things to hold up the back and stuff. And he used to hang me up by my ankles with chains. My mother would always really raise the heck with him for doing that. But I was a little kid. I was 3, he's 13. You know, when you do that to me. But he went in the military in the Second World War. He was eligible for that. He was born in 1920. So he was 21, 22 years old when he went. And I remember getting letters from him and seeing him in uniform and that sort of thing. And he was a pilot, flew B-25s, but never went overseas. And the war in Germany ended, and they were going to ship him to the Pacific, but they wanted him to train on gliders, and he didn't want to train on gliders. He did, but he hated it. Gliders, number one, when you land in a glider, you suddenly become in the infantry, and now you got to fight. And they're also very dangerous, particularly those that carry jeeps, those kind of things, because when you land, many of these jeeps just broke loose, and when they did, they ran over the pilot and the co-pilot. So he didn't really want to do that. But he got lucky. They dropped the atom bomb and he never had to go. So he got discharged in 45. But I had several cousins. I had one cousin that landed on Normandy Beach, went through the Battle of the Bulge, never got hurt, and got discharged in 45 or 46. I had a cousin that was in Guadalcanal. He died there during that invasion. Other than that, I don't know of any of my, I'm sure there were. We had a big family, and we didn't fraternize with many of them. My father just more or less took me to the one guy that was the bootlegger. I'd go over to his house all the time. And I did have an uncle that fought in World War I. He was gassed, mustard gas, in the Argonne Forest.
What was his name?
George Cole. And I didn't know much about him, except I was told he had 5 wives. Beyond that, I don't know too much about him. He was kind of the black sheep of the family.
Who was your favorite friend growing up before the war?
A guy by the name of Arlen Levy. Used to call him Bunky. We grew up together, went to high school together, both went to he went into University of Maryland, and I went and joined the Air Force.
Can you recall how you heard the news about Pearl Harbor being attacked?
No.
That's before you remember.
I 11 years old, those weren't the kind of things I even cared about.
During the Great Depression, Franklin Roosevelt was president, and he came up with lots of programs to help the unemployed and the desperately needy folks. Did your family participate in any of those?
Not to my knowledge.
Not to your knowledge.
My family, my father in particular, but his brothers also, coming from Russia, they escaped Russia during the Red and White Revolution. That's more or less when Lenin came to power about that time. And they were going to be drafted into the army, and they weren't sure which army, whether it was going to be the White Army or the Red Army. So they sort of escaped. And their remembrance of government was always very, very bad. So anything that the government had to offer, they stayed away from. They hated the government. It didn't matter what the government was or who they were. They were just against that kind of authority. And my father was that way till the day he died.
You wouldn't categorize them as an anarchist
No.
in the sense of the 1920 anarchists.
No. He just didn't want anything to do with it. When somebody come over to do a census, which he did do, because I found his census of 1910 and 1920. But I remember one day, I do remember this too, the census taker came, he threw him off the porch. Now, I don't know why he threw him off the porch, because the guy asked the wrong questions, or he didn't like the way he smiled, or whatever. But he just wouldn't have anything to do with it.
As a kid, did you belong to any type of organizations like the Boy Scouts or?
I belonged to the Boy Scouts and the Sea Scouts. As a matter of fact, I was on a boat that sunk in the middle of Chesapeake Bay. We had purchased a schooner, a 2-mast schooner, and there were 11 of us, and we went out on the boat. Whoever built that schooner, fixed it, whatever, used nails, and they used it for the bow. Now the bow boards are bent inward so that you have a sharp edge, for cutting through the water. The nails popped, and several of the boards came off, opened up, and the boat sank. And I do remember, I was, 16 or maybe even 17 by then, hanging on to one of the masts of these 7 or 8 of us in the middle of the Chesapeake Bay. It was just kind of weird and funny. But
How did you get rescued?
the Coast Guard came. got us.
Must have been really embarrassing.
Well, as kids, we thought it was great. It was a lot of fun. But yeah, and then I was a junior assistant scoutmaster for a little while. And after I graduated high school, I knew my parents didn't have any money to send me to college. And I knew there was such a thing as GI Bill. The war was over. So, and Korea hadn't started yet. So I enlisted. I enlisted in the Air Force for 3 years. And I went to basic training. In basic training, I applied for Officers Candidate School, and I got it. I got orders. And the Officers Candidate School was right across the field. I went to Lackland, Texas, Lackland Air Force Base for my basic, and the officers training was right across the field of Lackland. They were both on the same base. I went over with my duffel bag after my group, my platoon graduated, all graduated. They had their orders to go wherever they were going to go, and mine was to go to OCS. So I went across the field with my duffel bag, and I walked into the first sergeant. I gave him my orders, and he looked at me, looked at the orders, and he looked at me, and he said, "How old are you?" I was 18. Hand me back my orders. He said, "Come back when you're 20 and a half." In those days, you had to be 21 when you graduated OCS. You could not be an officer before that, unless it was a battlefield commission, like Audie Murphy or something like that. But otherwise, normally you had to be 20 and a half. So I took my duffel bag and I went back and I sat in the barracks, an empty barracks now, because everybody else is gone, for 2 months. I applied for every school that I could possibly apply for: radio, airplane engine mechanics, everything. Observer on an airplane, navigator, anything I could. I wore glasses, so I couldn't be a pilot, but I could be a lot of it. I couldn't get any of those schools. And finally, they handed me orders one day in December: "You're going overseas." And that was when the airlift was started. So evidently I went overseas for that. And I went to Wiesbaden, Germany, with my first station. I was there about a month learning supply, learning how it worked.
Before we go into that, how was basic training for you? Were you able to physically handle it?
Oh yeah. I was more able than most of the guys because I was athletic in those days.
Now, this is the beginning of the Air Force, right?
Yes,
It hadn't been around for very long when you enlisted.
that's right.
Was the programs already set up for the Air Force?
Yeah, I think they just kind of took the Army and just took all the procedures and everything, moving them into another base. Lackland had been the Air Force. I don't know about Army Air Force, but it had been the Air Force basic training for a good 6 or 8 months.
Is that El Paso or
No,
San
it's
Antonio?
San Antonio, Texas.
Yeah.
But I could march better than anybody in the platoon. There were 60 of us, and we had 4 squads of 15, and I could march better than any of them. So they made me a squad leader. And the reason I could march better is because I was in the Boy Scouts, and that's what we used to do. So they made me a squad leader, and I got along well with everybody. The guys in that squad were pretty good.
Did your parents come and visit you at any time?
No. As a matter of fact, when I told my mother I was going to enlist, and she had to sign the paper because I was still 17. When I got out of high school in June, I was 17. I didn't turn 18 until August. She wouldn't sign the paper. She said, I don't like the Army. As I told you, they came from Europe. They hated the government. They hated the military. And here her youngest son says he's going in the military. Her oldest son had to be in the military. He got drafted. I would have got drafted. The draft was on at that time. But I wanted to enlist because it gave me, I wouldn't go in the Army, I would go in the Air Force, and that's where I wanted to be. And she wouldn't sign the papers. And I told her, I said, Mom, in 1 month, I'm gonna be 18. And then I can go without your signature. So you're either gonna sign it, and I'll go away happy, or you won't sign it, and when I do go, I'll go away mad. And she signed it. She didn't want to, but she did. Now, as I said, she was 43 when I was born. So she's 60 now. They didn't have any money. And so they never went anywhere. I did all the travel. After basic training, I went home. My brother was, I don't know where he was. He traveled. He was a draftsman. He went around to a lot of different places. He worked for IBM and Kodak and Xerox, all three of them. And he used to just travel here and there.
When you were in San Antonio, did you go down to Riverwalk any?
There was no river walk. There was a stream. I remember standing on the bridge for the one time I went into San Antonio. They gave us 1 day of leave and 1 weekend. And I do remember standing on that bridge and looking down at that little stream down there. It couldn't have been more than 2 feet wide. And I have been to San Antonio since. I was in San Antonio 96, 97 or something. And we went to River Walk, which is full of restaurants and boats and everything else. There was no River Walk in 1948. Like I said, it was just a little bitty stream, nothing else.
So you spent 2 months waiting for orders, never getting accepted in any schools of any sort.
They're all too full. And then, as I say, the Berlin Airlift came along, and away I went. And I assume that's what they sent me. I mean, they didn't tell me that. They just told me I'm going to Germany. And I went to Wiesbaden, where I trained for 3 weeks, 4 weeks.
So there was no replacement squad that came in that barracks? You were just by yourself?
All by myself. Yeah, for a couple of months.
As you went across the ocean, did you take a ship or fly?
I was in a boat. The General William O. Darby. I went over on that, and I came back on that. And in 1999, I saw that ship in Norfolk Harbor. And we took a tour of the harbor. When down in Norfolk, the Navy is big down there. They had a lot of battleships and aircraft carriers and stuff that were all docked. So we took a tour, and it was in the Norfolk Harbor. You get on a tour boat, sightseeing boat, and they take you around. And there it was, the William O. Darby. I couldn't believe it. I told my wife, look at that, I was on that boat. It looked beautiful. I mean, it was just like it was brand new.
Were you seasick on the way across?
No, sir. On a troop ship, the bunks are 4 high. They're stacked 4 high. I was in the lower bunk, one right next to the deck. The gentleman in the upper bunk got sick. He was no longer, after he got sick that one time, he was no longer in the upper bunk. He was then on the lower bunk, and I was in the upper bunk. I volunteered for KP. I was put on pots and pans on the way over. I was PFC. Put on pots and pans on the way over. It was Christmas when we went over. Cold, you can't believe how cold it is on the Atlantic Ocean in the middle of December. And I was warm because I was in the cafeteria. And I used to sit in the cafeteria, all of the guys that were on KP, and we would eat ice cream and cake and whatever. And the guys on the deck, all the rest of them were huddled around these ventilator vents to keep warm. And we were just sitting there in our shirt sleeves and just happy as could be, all the way over. I did the same thing all the way back. Only now I was a sergeant. So instead of doing pots and pans, I was in charge of pots and pans. But I never got seasick.
Where did you land?
Bremerhaven. It's in northern Germany.
And how did you get to Wiesbaden?
Train. Put us all on a train.
Did you know any of these people you went across the sea with?
No, I was all alone. You know, I knew them, you know, I met them going over there, but I didn't know any of them.
Was this a time in the military where they still encouraged smoking?
I don't know whether they encouraged it or not. Everybody seemed to do it. I didn't. I never smoked.
Was there gambling going on board the ship on the way across?
Constantly. That's, the Navy used to tell us, make us, if you will, go up on deck. If they didn't say that to us, to the troops, a lot of the guys would have stayed there and gambled. They were always playing cards or shooting crap. It was a disease almost. And some of the guys came out broke and others came out with a lot of money. I didn't join in. I don't know. I never had that urge. I mean, yeah, I might play craps and lose $10. But some of these guys, they lose $400 or $500 their whole month's pay. I never did that.
As you got on the troop train to head to your base at Wiesbaden, was it a new group of folks that you were with?
Some of them were, because the ship I was on, they were mostly Army, not Air Force. A few Air Force guys, they went to Wiesbaden. Wiesbaden was an Air Force base.
We're talking thousands of men, right?
No, it was only 800 of us.
Okay.
On the whole boat, it was only 800. The Derby wasn't that big a troop transport. We could have squeezed more in there, you know, during war or something, but during peacetime it was only 800. It wasn't much.
When you got to Wiesbaden, what was your job? What did they do?
They trained me in supply. They trained me to do this transfer from Air Force requisitions to Army requisitions. They taught us how to get supplies out of the Army, which was difficult.
What made it hard?
It made it hard because we had a lot of the same equipment they did, and they didn't want to give up the supplies. For instance, Jeeps. They had the same Jeep we did. They had the same trucks we did. And trying to get just brake lines for the Jeeps was very difficult to get them from the Army, because they used them all the time too. And, well, like anybody, you know, they're jealous of what they have and they don't want to give it up, particularly to another branch of service. And some of the old-time officers, my commander, for instance, that I was with in this Army base, he was ex-Army. He transferred to the Air Force. His best friend was in the Army on this base, and he was still Army. So there was always this rivalry between the Army and the Air Force. And nowadays, you know, the Air Force has all their own stuff. But then they had to rely on the Army to get it.
When you went through Germany on that train and you got to Wiesbaden, what did it physically look like? Was it still bombed to pieces?
Yeah. It was a mess. You can't imagine. Now, Wiesbaden was not as bad as Frankfurt, Germany, which I went to next.
It's been 3 years since the war.
Well, many people were without houses. Many lived 2, 3 families in the same house. We bombed it to the level to the ground almost. We took everything. When you see the movies of, well, some of the war movies you see, those pictures are real. They just level almost everything.
Was there any people you saw there that just made you extremely sad because of their condition?
They made me sad because of the way they had to live. I mean, most of them were out of work. The ones that were making the money were the ones that worked for us, for US. I knew a gentleman, I met him later. I knew a guy that he pedaled on a bicycle 27 miles one way to work. And he worked for practically nothing. And they had food problems. They couldn't get cigarettes or anything. I used to sell my cigarettes. I said I never smoked. I used to sell them. They had coffee. You could sell it. Almost everything was for sale over there. Come on. And they were bad off. I can sympathize with the Iraqis today, how bad off some of them are. The big difference is nobody was shooting in those days. I knew people who were communists, who believed in the Russian way of life. And I learned how to speak a little German, and occasionally we would get into discussions about democracy versus communism. And they weren't like they hated us or anything like that. But their way of life was gone. Truly, it was, many of them, friends died. Their housing disappeared. They were struggling to eat, struggling for clothes, food, everything. Even 3 years after, they were like that. That went on, well, more or less till I left. It was like that.
2.5 years you were working as a supply clerk, and then you got new orders to participate in the Berlin Airlift. Can you tell me about that?
No, I worked as a supply clerk for 1 month.
1 month, okay.
In Wiesbaden, when I was trained. The Berlin Airlift sort of took off around that time with the replacement of the C-47s with the C-54s, which could take 4 or 5 times what a C-47 could take. They called pilots from everywhere. They even called back into the service 10,000 pilots to fly. They got airplanes, oh God, from everywhere. Hawaii, Texas, they brought them in from every place they could find them, C-54s. We had almost all the C-54s in existence. That was the biggest airplane there was in those days. and they needed people, mechanics, pilots. I remember air traffic controllers. I remember meeting a few civilians. They called in civilian air traffic controllers from the United States and brought them over because they needed them. And with me, all of a sudden, I was told, you have to report to Rhine, Maine tomorrow morning. Wiesbaden wasn't that far, so yeah, okay. I got on a train all by my little self. I'm 18 years old, in a foreign country, couldn't speak the language. They gave me tickets, orders, and told me to go. I had a guy, one of the orderlies took me to the train station, and I went. I got off in Frankfurt, Germany, and there was a guy there to meet me and a bunch of other guys too. I wasn't alone. And we all got in a truck, and we ended up in Rhine, Maine. And I went in to see the sergeant that was in charge, and he told me to leave my gear right there, and you go down to the flight line and see so-and-so, and he'll tell you what to do. I went down on flight lines. This guy hands me a clipboard. You see that airplane over there? Yeah. See what they're doing? Yeah. You go over there, you take a clipboard, and you write down everything that comes off that truck and goes on that airplane. Okay, Sarge. And I took the clipboard and I went over there, and they're all German. They're all talking German. I don't know what they're talking about. And the one guy that could speak English, he said, "You're here to take inventory?" I said, "Yeah." "Okay, get up in the airplane, write down what's there, and then check off this other half that we're loading." Okay. Again, I'm 18. Okay, I could take direction. I was a little scared. But yeah, I got on the airplane and I started writing down coal, counting the bags, cases of milk, writing it down, what it was, and so forth. And when I was all done, this guy comes over and he says, "Now you sign that." "Why am I signing it?" "You said it was here, so you sign it." Okay, I signed it. And he said, "Go in the hangar and get a flight suit." "What for?" "You're going."
Had you ever flown before?
I flew once in a Piper Cub that my brother took me up when he was on leave. As I said, he was a pilot. He took me up once. That was it.
Now you're getting on the biggest airplane that's ever been built.
Biggest airplane that I've ever been on. And, okay, so I went in, I got a flight suit. The guy gives me this harness and this sort of pillow. And I says, "What's that?" He says, "That's your chute in case you have to jump." Jump? He showed me how to do, what to do with it, and so forth and so on. And I went back, I got on the airplane, and we took off. And 2 hours later, 2.5 hours, 3 hours later, we're landing in Tempelhof in Berlin. And I got off the airplane, and I asked the crew chief, who'd been doing this for months now, back and forth, "What do I do now?" He says, "You check off the stuff that's going off, and then you get it signed that somebody actually received it." And he said, "We'll be here 15 minutes. So if you got to pee, go do it right now, right there." And, okay, and come right back, which I did, filled out the form, got it signed, it was on the airplane, we were gone in 20 minutes.
That's all it took time to unload, is 20 minutes.
That's all they would allow.
Did you get everything off?
Got it off. You had to get it off. You didn't have a choice.
But you weren't doing that.
I never
Somebody
touched
else
the
was
thing.
doing it.
No, all I did was check it.
What primary stuff did you carry on planes that you flew on?
Mostly coal and food, medicine. There were other planes, they had a lot of trouble with coal. Coal puts a lot of dust. It was getting into the cables on the airplanes. It was causing havoc with the engines. And at first, and I heard this as a story, at first they tried to do it with B-17s, but they couldn't land. B-17 was too big, it couldn't land in these bases, so they threw it out. They did that once. They literally threw it out, I think from 150 feet in the air. And they said, the story goes that the observers were covered with coal dust because when the coal hit the ground, the bag split and the coal just pulverized, I guess. Then they went to putting it in duffel bags. And I was wondering about that because I saw all these duffel bags coming off the truck. I didn't know what was in them. And the guy says, coal. They did that to keep down the dust. There was that much dust. There was also a problem with salt. Salt corrodes, as you know. We never carried salt. The British carried salt. The British had flying boats. And in a flying boat, because it lands on water, the bottom part of the cargo hold is isolated from the controls. At least that's what they told me. And so they carried all the salt because they landed in the Rhine River, I guess it was.
How many times did you do this?
I must have maybe 30 days at the most. I remember particularly that first flight when we came back, the guys, this was their last flight of that day. They had flown 12 hours. They'd been on duty for 12 hours. And this was their last flight. So it was the only flight I was on with them. You were with a different crew all the time. You never knew who you were going to fly with. And when I got off the airplane, I didn't know what to do. I'm just assigned to the base. I didn't know where I was supposed to sleep, eat, or anything. And so I did go back to the first sergeant, and he told me where to go. I went to a Quonset hut, and he said, take any bunk you can find. So I found a bunk. There was only one open, or one or two open, I don't remember. A Quonset hut, it's a big long thing. There were 40 bunks in there, single cots. There was a pot-bellied stove right in the middle of the Quonset hut. The guys that slept close to the stove were sleeping under sheets or nothing. The only bunk that was available was all the way at the end. And there was a guy at the end who was just leaving. And he said, you take my bunk and I'll take it when I come back. This will be our bunk, yours and mine. It's okay. And I looked at him and said, where's the sheets? And again at 18, I says, do we get new sheets each time we come here? He says, you don't use sheets. You sleep in your flight suit, you take all the blankets you can find, and you see that mattress over there, you put that over the top of you. That's the only way you're going to keep warm. And after one night, he's right. I slept with a flight suit. I never crawled under any sheet. There wasn't any. I slept on a mattress had 3 blankets and a mattress on top of me to keep warm. The guys, as they say, in the Quonset hut, the guys in the middle, where the stove was, pot-bellied stove, they were warm as toast. But the guys on the ends were freezing. And an airplane, I had problems sleeping the first night. Airplane taking off every 3 minutes. And I mean every 3 minutes.
From the airport you were at?
Yeah. And it was like they just went right over that Quonset hut because the whole place shook.
When your airplanes landed at Tempelhof and unloaded, did they even stop the engines?
Oh yeah, had to stop the engines. But we couldn't be there more than 15 or 20 minutes, and we had to leave. And if your approach, you missed the approach for some reason or other, and we did once, you didn't come back, try again. You went home with the load. There was a story about one of the generals who was just put in charge, what was that? He was coming into Tempelhof and he was stacking the airplanes. And when he saw this, they were all circling like they do, in a civilian when it's bad weather and stuff. He ordered every plane in that stack, except his, to go home. That's the story, anyway. And this happened a month or two before I got there. So it was, I remembered that story. And at that point in time, he says, every plane will stay 3 minutes from each other, and they will land or go home. They will be stacking. And evidently it worked pretty good, because the few flights I was on, and I had a different pilot every time. I didn't know who these guys were.
Did you fly more than one mission a day?
We flew, I think, 3.
You yourself, not just your pilots. But you
Well,
did?
the same plane.
Right.
Same plane. It was about 300 miles to Tempelhof. These planes didn't go that fast. And it took 15 or 20 minutes to load it, 15 or 20 minutes to unload it, a couple hours flying, and they flew 12 hours a day.
So you'd get off each time and a new pilot would come on?
No, I'd stay on the same plane for that day.
I see.
Then I go to sleep, and whatever. Even taking a shower was tough, because there was so many guys and so few facilities for us. Rhine, Maine used to, I think it used to be a German air base, but they never had the numbers of people that we had there, or airplanes either. And they just didn't have the facilities for us. They had to bring in portable kitchens. We had porta potties all over the place. And I don't think I took a shower for 3-4 days.
What did it feel like when you got up the next morning after your first night's attempted sleep?
I was tired. I wanted to know where the bathroom was.
But you hadn't really did any physical loading or unloading. You were just lying.
Yeah.
And yet you were still tired.
Well, I was tired because planes kept me awake all night, because I wasn't used to it.
What was the food that first breakfast the next morning?
It was pretty good. Their field kitchens were pretty good. I don't remember what it was. Probably eggs, bacon, whatever. Stuff on the ship.
Were you a big eater, or?
No, I was a skinny kid. I was 150 pounds, 6'1". You can imagine how skinny I was. And I was just hungry. And I didn't drink coffee at all in those days.
Did you have any friends that you made really quick in that first
The guy
year?
that slept in the same bed with me, yeah.
You remember his name?
No.
No.
I think his name was Charles, but I don't even remember what he looks like anymore.
So you would come back to that bunk and then switch out with him again?
Yeah. He and I switched off every 12 hours.
Did you fly at night or during the day?
Night too.
Night.
Yeah. Well, let's say we left a lot during the day, afternoons or something, and it blended into the night. I used to sleep on the airplane. That chest chute that I had, I'd put under my head and I'd sleep on it. Use it as a pillow. I got more sleep on the airplane than I did in the bunk. Because the airplane's taking off and the rattling of the Quonset hut used to drive us nuts. Everybody in the place. It was hard to get a good night's sleep doing that.
Was it cold on the airplane too?
Yeah. Well, we didn't have any heat. We never flew over 10,000 feet. So, I mean, it wasn't like you're really, really up there that far. I remember one time, my son asked me one day if I would like to go skydiving on my 80th birthday. And I said, yeah, I'll go. He said, wouldn't you be afraid to jump out of an airplane? I said, well, one time I almost jumped out of a C-54. One of the windows blew out and it made one terrible noise. Now, we weren't pressurized or anything like that, but this thing blew and I grabbed that chute from under my head because I was sleeping and had it on and was standing in the doorway ready to jump. And this crew chief, he comes over, he's probably been in the Air Force 40 years from the looks of him, and he said, what are you doing? I never forgot that. I said, I'm ready, Sarge. Whenever you say go, I'll go, just give me a push. He says, go back to sleep. Nothing's going on. You don't have to jump. But I was ready. I was scared to bitch after he got out. And he got killed from a piece of steel. They were picking it up off a ship. They were cutting up a ship for salvage. And the hoist, the hook broke. And a piece of steel came down, hit him right in the head and killed him.
So some jobs are very dangerous.
39 years old.
Oh, wow.
Well, he shouldn't have been standing under to begin with. But I miss him. I miss my brother. My brother died of lung cancer at 51.
Were there other close calls while flying that airplane?
Just the one time when we overshot the runway and the pilot had to really gun it to get up there again.
Did you ever have any time to go into Berlin besides at the airport?
You could not. They would not let you. You had to stay with that airplane.
When you looked out the window as you approached Berlin, could you see the separation of the city?
Oh yeah. In Berlin, there were 3 air bases in Berlin. Now, you know, Berlin was broken into zones. And the American zone had Tempelhof. And when you flew into Tempelhof, you flew between apartment buildings. That was your, what do they call it?
Approach?
Yeah, the ILF, whatever they call it. That was your approach, right between these apartment buildings. Just before you landed at Tempelhof, there were apartment buildings on both sides. You could literally look in and see people in the kitchen or in the, whatever they were doing. And you didn't want to stray sideways, I'll tell you. We're lucky. I don't know how many flights they flew 2 or 3,000, 5,000. I don't know how many they flew, but they never hit it. They always went down. And the weather, they said the weather in Tempelhof was worse than any place in the world. I don't know, I wouldn't have any place in the world.
You did this duty for about a month.
Yeah.
Were you flying almost every day? So it was about 30 times you went in and out, and multiple times each day.
Yeah, I don't think there were a couple days I had off too. They started to bring in more and more people, so the guys that were there got a little more relief. They were going 12 hours and 6 hours off, 8 hours off, and then they went to 8 hours and 12 hours off, and then they went to 8 hours and 24 hours off.
So
But that was a while.
if you estimated the number of flights, it would be in the 50 mark, at least.
Flights in that 1 month, maybe 40 or 50.
Did you get comfortable in that job?
Yeah, I started to enjoy it after a while. I wanted to get out in Berlin and see what it looked like. I could see it from the air.
Was it still bombed out?
A lot of it, yeah. Took a while to build that place up.
Could you see any real difference between the American zone and the Russian zone from the air?
We never, well, the Russian zone of Germany, we never got to the Russian zone of Berlin, but the Russian zone of Germany, yeah, I guess you could see a difference. It was still bombed out also. We were, 9 or 10,000 feet, so you don't get to see a hell of a lot from up there. But you could see the ruins, the bombed out part of it. I knew some people. I knew a girl whose parents lived in the Russian zone of Germany. And she hadn't seen her mother for, 5 years.
Because she was caught on the wrong side.
Yeah, and she was afraid to go back because if she did, she would never get back. They'd keep her in the Russian zone. It was very difficult to get out of the Russian zone. And as I say, there were cases where GIs had wandered into the Russian zone for one reason or another, chasing a girl or drunk or whatever, and they never came out. They just sort of gobbled them up and they disappeared there. It was a very trying time during that. And if it weren't for us and the Berlin Airlift, the Berlin people in the French, British, and American zone would have starved to death.
Did you feel like you were making some type of history at the time?
No. I just knew it was very, very important, and I knew that we had to keep doing it or these people would starve. I didn't know it would have turned into what it turned into.
At the airbase that you were stationed at, did they have other aircraft there besides the transports?
They had a few C-47s which flew before the 54s, but mostly the 54s because they took up the whole field. There were so many of them. I mean, they were lined up nose to tail. And that's the way they loaded them. They brought in, I understood that initially they would bring in tractor trailer load of coal. And then they'd load, 40 bags on that plane, 40 bags on that plane, 40 bags on the next one. They stopped doing that. They started to bring in 40 bags of coal, 30 boxes of medicine, one tractor trailer load of goods for that airplane. So you only had one truck to unload. You didn't have three. You just had one, and you were, the way they had it, you were lined up and loaded the way you were lined up. So the plane in front of you got loaded before you did. Your tractor trailer got there 3 minutes after the one in front of you did. He was loaded, he's on his way. You're loaded, you're on your way, and it went that way. Otherwise, they couldn't do it because it would be pulling out people in the middle. But they really got it down to a science. This General Taylor, I don't know. The only one I really remember is General Clay, who was in charge of the European theater, the American European theater, and General LeMay, who gained a lot of fame for all the wonderful things he did. And they brought a guy in that flew what they used to call the hump, which was India to China during the Chinese-Japanese War, even before the United States got involved, even before Japan bombed Pearl Harbor. And they brought him over because he knew how to do it. He had done it there. He was with C-47s. They were supplying the Chinese people all the time. And they brought him in, and he knew what he was doing, and he organized it that way. It was amazing the way they did it. I mean, you had to stay 3 minutes behind the plane in front of you. And they did. I don't know how they did it. I sat in the cockpit one day. Well, I stood in the cockpit one day and watched them do it. And the pilot was constantly speeding up and slowing down, just so he could stay 3 minutes ahead of the guy in front of him.
As your turn at the duty of the airlift came to an end, where did they send you?
They sent me to this place, Hannah, where I was there 2.5 years.
And you were there as supply clerk with all these forms and so on?
Yeah, to expedite between the Air Force and the Army.
Did you enjoy that work, or was it tedium?
Well, it was like any desk job, you know, it gets paperwork,
Sure.
It gets boring, but at that particular base with only 5 of us, we were pretty free to do whatever we wanted to do. I had a pass, a 3-day pass every night if I wanted to take it. I had a signed 3-day pass in my wallet that my officer had given me. And he says, you know, if you go out and you get in trouble or something, just stay out and come back later. It was very lax. It was like a day job, almost. The only time that there was any excitement was when Korea was invaded. And that happened in 1950.
What happened, in your opinion, in recollection?
I'll never forget that. This happened at 4 o'clock in the morning in Germany when North Korea invaded South Korea. And the 5 of us enlisted men were all in one room. Now we were in a German barracks, really plush, I'll tell you. Hardwood floors, brick building, really nice place. And we got woke up. And the guy who woke us up, he said, get your packs and your helmets and go down to the armory and draw a weapon. And I think almost to a man, to the 5 of us, we said, we don't have any packs. We don't have any helmets. We're in the Air Force. And he said, I remember there was 1,000 guys who was in the Army on this base. And we were just 5. And he said, will you go downstairs and they'll give you a pack and a helmet. He didn't tell us why. You know, we kept saying, why? What's going on? You'll find out. When we went downstairs to the armory, and there's a whole line of guys standing there. all of them with packs on and helmets on their head. And so we went up to the supply sergeant. He gave us a pack and a helmet. What's in there? Well, mostly K rations if you get hungry. And then we went to the armory, and the guy hands me this rifle. And I just sort of looked at it, said, "What is this?" He said, "That is an M1. I said, "I don't know anything about an M1. I'm in the Air Force. I never fired an M1 in my life. Don't you have a carbine maybe or something?" He said, "Well, when they start shooting at you, just ask the guy next to you. He'll tell you how to shoot back." We got on trucks, and that's when we found out what was going on. We got on trucks and rode for, what they were afraid of was the Russians were going to come too, and they were going to go into the American zone and take over. And we got on trucks and we rode 18 hours into France. When we got there, they found out the Russians were not coming, so we went 18 hours, went back to the barracks, turned in our packs, our helmets, our M1s, and went back to bed.
So you were retreating into France, away from Germany?
Oh yeah.
Fearing that they were going to overrun us?
Yeah. They left one division to stop them, to be a rear action, I guess, rear guard action. They would overrun them in 5 minutes. They never came. We thought, you know, they were Russians being communist, North Korea being communist. Everybody thought that they would plan this together, but they hadn't done it. So we just went right back and assumed our normal, easy life, if you will. Where I was for another, President Truman extended, because of Korea, extended everybody's enlistment by 1 year.
So you went in for 3, but you ended up getting 4.
Right.
Did you want it?
I didn't care. I was having a ball. To be honest with you. By then, you know, I was 20, 21, living off a German economy. Everything is cheap. I sent my paycheck home every month. I had a German that would wash my clothes, clean my room, make my bed. I gave him 2 cigarettes a week. It was easy life.
Did you travel much during those 2.5 years?
Yes. I went to Denmark. I went to Switzerland. Went to France.
Were those countries also bombed out as bad as Germany?
They weren't as bad as Germany.
I know Switzerland was never attacked, but
No,
I was thinking of Denmark or France.
The other, well, Paris, nobody ever attacked either. They left Paris intact. And basically, no, we didn't bomb those other places, to my knowledge, like we did Germany. Germany had all their factories there. And I mean, you see all these movies about the so-called ball bearing factories and stuff, and that's where they went. And they got away from, when Germany started to bomb London, that's when the British, mostly the British, started to bomb Germany. They didn't care anymore. They were sort of zeroing in on military targets. But after that, and with the rocket, the V-2 rocket, I remember that too, they didn't care. They just dropped them.
Did you visit any of the concentration camp sites?
One.
You went to Dachau.
I saw the ovens. And all these people that think that's a myth about the ovens and the Holocaust and whatever should go and see it.
Did you go because you were curious?
Yes, mostly. I was curious. And I had the wherewithal to do it. I had the money to do it. I also had a vehicle to do it. And
How'd you get a vehicle? I don't understand.
I owned a car
In Germany?
in Germany. I had a 1940 Packard.
So you were really living well here.
I was living well. I didn't gamble. As I say, I sent most of my money home. And I bartered things that Germans wanted. If I needed work on the car, I used to go to this German mechanic who was a Luftwaffe pilot. And we got along fine. And I'd give him cigarettes, coffee, and he'd fix my car. And the guys always used to say I was a smart one because I didn't gamble. Most of them did.
Did you go into town to bars and or clubs or dancing or?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
My friend was 6'6". He was with the other military guys, Air Force guys with me. He was 6'6". He weighed 280 pounds, and I never got in a fight because he was always with me, and nobody would touch the two of us. You got to understand, I guess, about the military. They not only like to fight in wars, they just like to fight. And one service would fight another service, one division would fight another division, one company would fight another company. They didn't have anything else to do. There were no amusements, movies, family to go visit, nothing. When you're in an occupied country, it's not like today. Today, the soldiers take their wives, their children, and everything else into their service time in an occupied country. In those days, a lot of these guys that I knew were in the Second World War, and they just stayed. They went home for 30 days, they went back. And they amused themselves a lot of times with just going out and drinking and carousing. And I don't know, I never did that. I just always too smart for it or didn't want to get hit in the nose.
But you did go places and
Oh, yeah.
and did you meet any local girls or?
Yeah, I knew a girl that I went with sort of for 2 years. And if it weren't for me, she'd starve to death. I supplied her with food, money, just about everything. And in a lot of these towns, some of the people liked GIs and some of them didn't.
In Germany.
In Germany, yeah. Well, we were a conquering army. So some people liked us, the ones who worked for us liked us. We had, like I say, the mess hall, for instance. Nobody ever pulled mess duty, KP. We were all Germans. They cooked, they served, and they cleaned up. And the United States government paid them for that. And the GI, he had his duties. I used to play softball over there. That was my one, let's say, vigorous part of exercise. And I was just one Air Force guy playing on an Army softball team. And we went to different Army bases, and I'm still one Air Force guy playing on an Army softball team. They didn't know it.
When you traveled about in your car to different villages and towns, were you ever armed against the civilians who might?
No.
Did you ever come across any civilians that were outwardly angry and
Actually,
cursing? No.
No.
But sometimes you felt like they didn't
Well,
like the GI.
There was, as I say, there was one town that was heavily communist, And I was one of the few GIs, I guess, that would actually go there. And it had a very nice restaurant in it that I liked to go to. And this girl that I knew, we used to go there. And of course, she could speak fluent English and also German. She took English in school for 8 years. And she said most of the students then took English for 8 years because Hitler was going to conquer the world, and English was the language. And I used to go to this one restaurant with her, and every now and then we would get into conversations with the people that were communists. And we had good discussions. There was no anger, no bitterness flying around, just like a Democrat and a Republican talking, you know. You don't get up and start a fight just because of that. And I used to go to that one town, and most of the guys wouldn't go.
Did you ever get close to the border between East and West Germany?
Well, once I did, yeah. I was in the French zone at that time. I was sent to the British zone and the French zone on occasion to work with their people on supplying Berlin, because some of the flights came out of the British and French zone. And I do remember the one time I was in the British zone, I was there for a week, and I hated it because the British food, at least then, was not something that a good American boy liked. I'll tell you, we had tomatoes 3 times a day. Stewed tomatoes, raw tomatoes, boiled tomatoes, squash tomatoes, whatever it was, it seemed to be tomatoes. And of course you had to have your tea every day. I mean, we take coffee breaks and literally everything stops for a tea break in the British. And, but I went to the French zone once and I almost wandered into the Russian zone. A French soldier stopped me, who happened to be on border patrol, just like if you looked hard enough, you could see the Russian on the other side. And I don't know, I remember saying something to the guy. I said, well, he'll like me. I came from Russia. My parents came from Russia. They wouldn't have a problem with me, which was just talking out of the side of my mouth.
Was there some type of barbed wire fence between the zones?
There was in places I understood. I never saw it. There wasn't where I was. It was just on a street. There was one part, half of the street was Russian, the other half was French. And you just didn't wander across that street. It was weird, a lot of places.
Did you take many photographs while you were in the Army, or in the Air Force?
I took a lot of photographs when I was in the Air Force. I went to Paris with a friend of mine. We drove to Paris, and I told him I was going into the hotel and I want him to hide the camera. This is the middle of Paris now. Hide the camera so nobody steals it. I'll be back in a few minutes once I check into the room. Well, I checked into the room, he wandered off. And somebody broke in the car and stole my camera and all my film. So I got nothing. I had pictures of the Eiffel Tower where I was up top of it. I got pictures of the Champs-Élysées, you know, the big road. And I got nothing.
Did you, were you able to travel all over these different countries without a passport?
Oh yeah. Military. Wear a uniform and go.
And so you were in your uniform.
They never stopped me.
Did you ever wear civilian clothes?
Oh yeah. Once I got to where I was going, when we went to Paris, we changed. And I mean, I had a military badge. That's all I needed was my badge, and I could go anywhere I wanted to go.
Were there any pranks that were pulled, like jokes that were pulled on you, or did you pull jokes on others during your time in the service?
No.
Did you carry anything for good luck?
I had an old beat up rabbit's foot, but I don't know whether it was for good luck or not.
You spent 4 years overseas.
3.
3 years overseas. From the time you're 18 and a half to 22 and a half or whatever.
Yeah.
How much growing up did you do?
Quite a bit. I don't want to say this like conceit, but I was always grown up. I knew what I wanted, and in spite of my father and my mother, I did mostly what I wanted to do. I wanted to be an engineer. I know what I needed to do it. In Baltimore, there are 2 schools. One is an engineering type high school, and the other is more of an academic where lawyers, doctors, and businessmen go. And I was told by my mother, by my father also, I would go to the other school. And I said, no, I'm going to the engineering school because that's what I want to do. And I did. I always knew what I wanted to do, and I did it. In the military, as they say, I followed the rules. I didn't break the rules. I didn't try to put one over on anybody, and nobody could put anything over on me either.
As you got older, did you reconsider the idea of becoming an officer?
When I got to, I came here, came back, landed at Fort Dix, went home for a week or so, and I was transferred to Hamilton Field, California. I got there in January of '52, and President Truman had not only extended everybody, but he also froze promotions. So I was Airman Second a lot longer than anybody should have been an Airman Second. And when I got to California, they gave me a warehouse, which I was in charge of. Everybody else, the other warehouses, everybody in the place was staff sergeant. And here I am a corporal, basically a corporal, and was the Airman Second. And I got a warehouse too. And I figured I'd be promoted in a month or 2. Well, I wasn't. So I went in to see my commanding officer and asked him why I wasn't promoted, but Joe Blow over there in the orderly room was, which is one of those it's who you know type deal. And he said, well, I don't know you well enough. I said, you know me for 2 months, and you know what I can do, because, he's a lieutenant, and I'm talking back to him, sort of, respectfully. And he said something about, well, your enlistment's up in July. Would you re-enlist if I got you promoted? I said, well, sir, I'd think about it. I got promoted next month. In July, I came in with my discharge papers. And he said, I thought you were going to re-enlist. I said, no, sir. I said, I'd think about it. And I don't think I want to stay in the Air Force unless I can go to OCS. And he said, well, I can arrange that if you want to do that. I said, okay. Then I'll stay in for that term until I get through OCS, and then I'll re-enlist. He says, no, you got to re-enlist now. And I said, all right, 3 years? No, 6. 6 years I got to re-enlist to go to OCS? He says, yeah. Signed the discharge papers. So I left. I got home. I drove a truck for a while. I met a girl in California. A year later, I went back and married her. And she's still my wife, 55 years later. And she said, I want you to go to college. I got the GI Bill. I went to University of Maryland, got a BS in engineering. And then I went to work for Hughes Aircraft Company. And it was airplanes again. And I like airplanes. And I used to teach pilots how to use their weapon system. And I have flown in jet airplanes, and I have instructed pilots for quite a while on how to shoot missiles. And I've been in just about every fighter plane up to the F-14. And
Not as a pilot, though.
not as a pilot, just as second seat to show the pilots how to shoot. And when I saw pictures of pilots, what they saw in Desert Storm, what their cockpit looked like, and the scope that they were looking at, what I was doing was like kindergarten to what these guys do. I mean, it's so different from what it was in the 50s to what it is today. Technology, anyway, which is advanced. But I really enjoyed that a lot. And during that period of service with Hughes Aircraft Company, I flew in C-47s, C-54s. I told one of the pilots one day, it's just like old home week, you know, flying in that airplane. So I did a lot of flying.
Did your military experience influence your thinking about war, about the military?
What it influenced was, I guess what Patton or one of them said, war is hell. And when I saw the devastation of Germany and how those people had to live, I really felt sorry for them. And I wish nobody would ever has to be in that situation. And that's what the Iraqi people are in right now.
Did you ever contact or stay in touch with the people that you worked with while you were in the Air Force?
Yeah, there was a guy down in North Carolina, name of James Boykin, who I've seen twice. My daughter lives in North Carolina, and when I went to see her, I went to see him too. I haven't heard from him for 3-4 years. And he told me about the other 2 or 3 guys that we served with. He kept in touch with them. Other than that, none of the military guys anymore.
Did you ever remember, or I'm trying to look for the right words here, but you were in this Berlin airlift for about 1 month.
That's about it.
Have you ever sought out a way of going to a reunion of any sort with them?
No, I did find out when I had talked to you. I did some research on that, and there is a Berlin Airlift Association. And I talked to one of the guys who was a flight engineer on one of the airplanes, and matter of fact, he sent me some stuff that he had presented to something very similar to what you're talking about. And he sent me an application to join, which I haven't done yet, but I might. He's in Illinois or Indiana, somewhere.
Do you think the military benefited your life?
Yes, I loved it. I had a ball. Really did. I talked to my wife just the other day, as a matter of fact, and said, what do you think our life would have been like if I had stayed in the military? If I went to OCS, I probably would have still married you, maybe, maybe not. But our life would have been so much different as an officer in the Air Force. I mean, we'd be living Army bases, Air Force bases anyway, and it would have been so different than it was.
Do you think you have any regrets?
Oh, I have no regrets. I've lived a pretty good life with my education and whatever. My children have all grown up healthy. My wife and I are healthy. I'm 78 years old now.
You had mentioned that your father was pretty detached from you.
Yes.
Did you use that experience to not become detached from your own children? Or did it really affect you?
Not really. Not really. He grew up with a European childhood in a, let's just say, a totalitarian country. And I grew up in the United States. And the United States was just different. I played with my kids. They did a lot of the things I did, you know, join the Boy Scouts and baseball leagues and that kind of stuff. And the wife and I, we were there to support them, whereas my father wasn't. I saw him on Sunday morning. He worked 6.5 days a week. I saw him on a Sunday morning, my brother and I, and he read the funnies to us. That was the only time we really saw him. And he had a hard life. He had diabetes. He lost a leg when he was 78 years old. At 80 years old, he lost the other leg. It was all due to circulation and diabetes. And my mother had Alzheimer's, and we had to commit her. And he lived alone. I was going to, and I really didn't want to, but I was going to bring him to live with me. My brother couldn't afford it and didn't have the wherewithal to do it. So I was going to bring him to live with me. He wouldn't go, my father. He wouldn't live alone. And he did. No legs, going blind, had bad cataracts, hard of hearing, but obstinate as hell. And he would not. The mailman, we had a mailbox on the door. That's the way it used to be. You didn't have it out on the street like you do now. The mailman would come and ring the bell and give him his mail because he had no way of reaching it. There was a grocery store up the street, one of these neighborhood, type grocery stores, and they would bring him food. He fell out of his bed one day, had a stroke, is what they think. And we found him. I didn't find him. There was a nurse that lived upstairs. He had an apartment. She would look in on him once in a while. She found him, and he was laying on the floor. And my brother and I found out about it. We went to the hospital in Baltimore, and he was in a coma for 5 days. And he died, never woke up. He had a very, very difficult life. The most money he ever earned was in 1942. And I know this because I had to go through his books so I could get him Social Security. He made $6,200. And that was because there was a war on, and he took pictures of GIs. And he was a smart man. He learned English by himself. He could write tremendous handwriting. Read and write English, learned all by himself. Nobody taught him. And that's one of the things that sort of anger me about the current crop of immigrants that come over here. And my mother too learned English all by herself. All my uncles learned English all by themselves. And I only have one cousin that I see right now, two that I see. The rest of my family is wherever they are. I wouldn't know anything about that. But the old man, he lived a tough life. And compared to my life to his, I lived like a king compared to the way he lived. But he fed us, he took care of us. He only beat me once. I fell down the cellar steps when I was 2 years old. 2 years old. And he said, I told you not to go near the cellar steps, and now you will remember. My mother told me this. And he tried a couple of times to whip me, but I was faster than he was. I used to run upstairs and jump off the second floor roof. And he could never catch me, so he gave it up.
Did you talk much to your own children about your time growing up and during the service years?
I'll be very honest with you. Yes, I've talked to them. Are they interested? No. But I've talked to them, but they're not interested. I've never shown them these. They don't care. They've never asked me about, the only thing they've ever asked me is about their mother, because I met their mother when I was in the military. And that's kind of funny too. She was, she and I communicated for a year after I left. And she all of a sudden stopped. I'd call on the phone, she wouldn't talk to me and so forth. And I learned a long time ago that if you go out with a girl, always get in good with their mother. So I called her mother, and mother said she's going to get married on July the 4th. And this was, I think, June the 20th or something like that. I borrowed money from my boss, and I flew out on the 3rd of July. Needless to say, she didn't get married on July the 4th. And her mother, I wanted to take her back to Baltimore and marry her. You know, her mother would not let me take her. She said, you want to get married right here when I can see you get married. She was 17, my wife was. She just turned 18, 1 month 18. So I couldn't get on an airplane with her and take her home. So we got married in California, and we boarded a DC-3, which is a C-47. It took us 18 hours to go from California to Maryland, 3 stops to refuel. When we got home, my mother would not allow me to sleep with my wife because she had not seen us get married. And I had to get married again. So I got married twice. Once in Maryland, once in California. When I tell that to people, oh, you've been married twice? Who was your first wife? Same one.
Thank you very much for your interview, Mr. Cole.
Thank you for coming over. You helped me reminisce on some wonderful ideas.